And on this special day reviewing the papers, I'm joined by Lord Dannatt, former Chief of the General Staff, CNN's Christiane Amanpour, and from Leave Means Leave, Richard Tice. But first, the news with Ben Thompson.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. Nigel Farage has become the first British politician to meet Donald Trump since he became US President-elect. A spokeswoman for Mr. Trump said the two men talked about freedom and winning at the meeting in New York. UKIP said the encounter had left Theresa May looking very silly. She's not due to meet Mr. Trump until next year. Thousands of demonstrators held a fourth day of protests against Mr. Trump. Hillary Clinton has blamed her defeat in the US presidential election on interventions by the FBI. Speaking for the first time about why she thinks she lost the race, she's blamed the Bureau's director, James Comey, for her defeat. She told a group of donors that the reopening of an investigation into her use of emails days before the vote stopped her momentum. France is marking the first anniversary of the Paris attacks. 130 people died in a coordinated assault by Islamist gunmen and suicide bombers on bars, restaurants, the National Stadium and a concert hall. President Hollande will visit each site this morning. The Bataclan, where 90 people were killed, reopened last night with a performance by Sting. Scores of armed police line the streets leading to the venue. And services will take place across the country this morning to mark Remembrance Sunday. At 11 o'clock, a 2-minute silence will be held to honour all those who've died in conflict. The Queen will lead commemorations at the Cenotaph in London. That's all from me for now. Andrew, back to you.
Many thanks, Ben. Now, not surprisingly perhaps, the papers more or less all agree that the aftershock of Trump is the story. Here's the Sunday Telegraph. Trump-Putin alliance sparks diplomatic crisis. We're going to be talking a lot about that. The Observer has going it alone, not an option. The NATO chief, that's Mr. Stoltenberg, warns Trump. And there's the Sunday Times. Britain's plan to tame Trump, as if he's some kind of silverback primate. And he's sitting there like a silverback primate on the front page. Plus much else. Other papers go on other stories. The Mail on Sunday is a story about the shame of the Poppy Day profiteers, a charity being banned in a crackdown on rogues ripping off our heroes, it says. But let's start, as promised, with Mr. Trump and Christiane Amanpour, front page of the Sunday Telegraph.
Well, indeed, Andrew, this is Trump-Putin alliance sparks diplomatic crisis. And this is something that has been a big fear of the West, obviously, even during the campaign, because of the very close and cosy and warm relations that both men have expressed towards each other. Putin is assumed and believed to have interfered in the US democratic process and indeed in democratic processes around the world. And now people are very concerned that Trump might accede to Putin's view that that's his sphere of influence. Already Dmitry Peskov, his spokesman, told me that one of the first things Trump could do is pull back or slow down NATO deployment on the border there. And then, of course, you have the Syria issue, where Trump views Syria in terms of how Putin does.
So the people that should be most worried would be the Baltic states and the Poles and so on the Russian border at the moment.
I think that's the case, but also the entire post-war security alliance is potentially about to be turned on its head.
Richard Dannatt, Lord
Lord Of course,
Dannatt.
that plays into the front-page story on The Observer about NATO. Now, Donald Trump has been saying what other people have been saying in the past, that America can't pay the bill indefinitely. Better part of 70% of NATO's costs are paid by the United States. And I think there's a real opportunity for the UK here. We're leaving the European Union, but within the framework of NATO, there's a chance for Britain to take a bit of a lead here. We are spending 2% of GDP on defence. I think we should up that a little bit to 2.25%, 2.5%, really? And actually show that we are taking our own defence as part of Europe seriously. I think there's an opportunity. It's the right thing to do. I think it's also a way of actually seeing off Donald Trump's isolationism. Because if we are seen to be stepping up to the plate, then frankly his argument is trumped itself.
Trumped. And can I ask you, Richard, about the future of our relations with the other European defence partners? Because post-EU, we know that Brussels is talking about a new European army, and we're not terribly keen on that. But presumably we have some trump cards. I must stop saying trump cards in terms of GCHQ and security. We have things they desperately want, so we can have a close relationship post-Brexit on defence.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States on defence and intelligence has always been very close and will be very close. And that puts us in a unique position in Europe, in a position of leadership. which is why I think if we also upped our defence spending, we'd really strengthen that. And I mean, and just going on exactly the same thing into the Sunday Times leader, our mission to bridge the Atlantic gap. We don't want to get too carried away with that, but there's a real opportunity, I think, to sensibly influence how policy will be formulated in Washington in the future. And I think that's worth having our eyes open to.
And we mustn't talk ourselves into a total gloom.
Well,
You've
absolutely.
got good news on the front page of the
I mean, there's
Express,
huge
Richard.
opportunities on the Express here. You can talk about, we can look at the opportunities for trade, going into page 2, and, you know, responding to this new opportunity. There's a great chance to do a very quick, limited trade deal in 2017, get it ready, get it agreed, ready to sign as soon as we leave the European Union. And that actually means that it'll enhance our negotiating leverage with the European Union. If German car manufacturers see that actually we've already got a deal lined up that'll reduce tariffs on, for example, American cars, they'll be worried about seeing more Jeeps than Mercedes on our streets. That's a positive thing.
And is there a real chance for us to do that? Because I thought that Trump was a protectionist. I thought he wanted more tariffs and more barriers.
Well, I was at the convention in July, and it was made very clear to me then, and it's been made clear since, Britain is at the front of the queue. And isn't it interesting? The first politician that he's seen is someone from Britain who's helped him, Nigel Farage. It's in some of the newspapers, but there's a picture here of them meeting yesterday. They spent an hour together, hugely positive
And
about his relations
spoken
with...
to Nigel Farage.
I spoke
since
to Nigel
then.
after that
What did he tell
meeting.
you?
They spent just under an hour together, and he said it was a very warm, positive meeting. You know, Trump is very clearly an Anglophile, and isn't it interesting that he's already agreed to put the bust of Winston Churchill back in the Oval Office? I think that tells a very important message.
Just a little word of caution, so did George Bush, and did you see the wars we had?
Yeah, but
Could this be maybe a backlash to what we've had in the 2000s?
There's a big difference. Trump is a deal maker, and he wants to put America back to work, and we've got huge opportunities to build on that.
Because what he's done with China, because I interviewed a big Chinese official this week, very concerned, the Chinese, about a trade war, as you bring up, Andrew, and about a potential global recession, which could backfire here as well.
Let me just return to the Farage question, because he's photographed gurning with Mr. Trump on the front page of the Mail, for instance. They're the big grins together. And it's been suggested that he could have some kind of role as a bridge between our government and the Trump administration. But the Tories don't like him. He doesn't like the Tories. I just don't see this working.
Frankly, everybody needs to be grown up about this. It's so much more important than petty party politics. This is our national interest. We have a huge opportunity both in terms of trade. There's another opportunity to do a joint tax deal so that we can reduce the ability of global multinationals to avoid tax. That could yield billions of pounds and dollars for us, both in our national coffers. And the sort of people that Trump is going to have in his cabinet, very, very different. Billionaires, potentially. You could have 2 or 3 billionaires, the likes of Tom Barrack, the likes of Steve Mnuchin.
Tom Barrack, somebody you've
Tom
worked
Barrack is
with.
someone that I've spent about £300 million of his group's money over the last couple of years. These guys are from the world of private equity. They're real deal makers. They expect things to happen and fast, and they don't take no for an answer.
I think the other thing that's worth just observing in one of the papers, Donald Trump and Theresa May, that might have been the 11th phone call that he made, but actually Vice President-elect Pence rang Boris Johnson, who took a call in a meeting in Belgrade, and he was the first person that he spoke to. And I think that indicates, actually, they do want to talk to us.
Now, one of the things that appears to be happening is there's movements of kind of protest, upsurge, going on all around the world against the way things are. And in Europe in particular, those protests are going to parties of the right. And the Observer has an interesting double-page spread there of all the right-wing European leaders who may benefit
it's not just
in the
right.
next phase.
It's extreme right, it's hardline right, it's white nationalism. And I think one ought to be careful about what the agenda is. And I, after Brexit, did not think Trump couldn't win. I also was at the convention. I was on the floor of the convention. I also interviewed Nigel Farage, who was very pro-Trumpian, pro-Putin in his view too, but that's more of that later. But you've just interviewed Marine Le Pen, who believes she can win, and so does the French establishment now. It'll be about voters who've never voted before and who come out, if that's the case.
I just wanted to ask you about that, because conventional wisdom is that the Republican Party in France will choose either Sarkozy or, more probably at this moment, Juppé. And then what happened last time round, you go into the second round, and it's Marine Le Pen against a mainstream conservative, and the French electorate, socialist, conservative, all rallies round behind the
They did last time, but
so why won't it happen this time?
Why should it happen this time? If we are in this tectonic shift, which, for better or for ill, it looks like we are with Brexit, with Trump, it's possible. Also, there is this sort of momentum view of history. Also, we're in a moment where it's an individual. Do you know what? It's individuals who are saying all sorts of things, including things that they may never, ever, ever be able to deliver. And these are the people who are appealing to the fear, to appealing to the genuine hurt, and they have their own very narrow white backlash agenda.
But sadly, too many people have been left behind by the establishment, and they've got the confidence to say, actually, we can vote for change.
Yes.
Let's try something different.
Now, I used the perhaps slightly lazy thing as a kind of march of the right, Richard, but actually there are very, very different forms of right. There's free market right, victorious in Britain, as it were, and then around the world there's protectionists as well. So there are very, very different political philosophies all under this umbrella.
And frankly, I think this is old school language. I think we need to talk about the march of common sense, the march of getting people back to work, and pragmatism, and you know, investing money, whether it's in security and defence or whether it's in rebuilding infrastructure. Actually, the same issue is here in Britain, and that's what I think you know, our Chancellor should be looking at with our autumn statement. All of these are really important issues that our voters want to see.
I don't think it's old language, and let's just say, seriously, because Angela Merkel is the only world leader who's had the guts to actually make a conditional offer to Donald Trump, saying, I congratulate the American president and the American people. However, our relationship is based on all these values, and she named them all, including minority rights, including different orientations. And she said, based on those joint common values, I offer cooperation to Mr. Trump.
But I think
on this
that's our
day of all
opportunity.
days, we must not forget the large coverage of the commemoration